Shalom, family. I hope you're all doing well. Listen, Alaska got hit by a typhoon. And just like Asheville, North Carolina, they got no warning. People are missing. Several villages are completely gone. The people that they're taking out of there, rescuing, they're telling them they can't go back. The villages are destroyed. And they went underwater and, Donald Trump fired a lot of people that took care of the warnings from the National Weather Service, the NOAA, and now with the government shutdown, I'm sure it's even worse. So they got no warning. And this thing, they said, hit at 100 miles per hour. So I'm going to show you some of the footage. And no, it's not real big on mainstream news. And it really should be a story like this. Yeah, it should be. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Yeah. Okay. Please give me a one if you can see my screen. So it's just coming out, but mainly from Hawaii, from not Hawaii, from Alaska. And wow, I mean, what a thing to happen to people with no warning. But this is the way Donald Trump wants it, and he made all these cuts to the weather service. I guess he think it's not really necessary, or maybe they're trying to call the population. That's why he did it. Who knows? But I think it's a wicked thing to do. So let's get started.
Overnight, hundreds of residents in storm-blasted western Alaska airlifted to safety. People plucked from their flood-ravaged homes across an enormous remote area. The largest airlift in Alaska history follows this weekend's massive storm surge and 100-mile-per-hour winds fueled by Typhoon Halong, washing entire parts of towns into the Bering Sea, and it has left one person dead and two missing so far. More than 6 feet of water in some parts.
It sounded like a lot of stuff was just hitting the house. Everything in my house was shaking.
In the town of Kipnuk, this drone video shows what now looks like a muddy bog. Elsewhere, piles of homes and boardwalk mashed together. Remote coastal towns hit the hardest, most residents forced to evacuate to Anchorage. The Alaska Air National Guard packing about 300 residents into the C-17, including children, the elderly, and these dogs. The C-17 touching down at Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson, and families pouring out, carrying those bundles, pushing the elderly in wheelchairs and onto buses to escape towns that are now uninhabitable.
It's a nightmare what we went through.
Tristan Carl watched his uncle's home swept away.
I saw my cousin and my nephew in there, and I never heard panicking or yelling like that ever before.
Glenn Charlie grateful his family's okay.
The buildings, whatnot, could be replaced, but a life cannot. Life cannot be replaced.
And one of the reasons this is such a massively complex rescue operation is the tyranny of distance in Alaska. It is 500 air miles from the affected areas to Anchorage, and officials tell me with temperatures dipping below zero in many of the affected areas, it is a race against time to get people out of those saturated homes and to find the missing.
Yes, so many complicating factors there. Matt Gutman for us. Thank you. We appreciate it. Let's get right to Ginger now with more on the extraordinary weather conditions that led to this situation in Alaska.
Yeah, it's really quite a journey. That Typhoon Halong, when it was south of Japan, was the equivalent of a Cat 4 hurricane. But then it quickly decreased in intensity. It became this kind of low pressure system, got caught up in upper level lows, and a strong jet stream pushed into southwestern Alaska. And that is what made it, on top of the Bering Sea being very warm. So here's what happened. happen, this region gets that push of water like a bulldozer pushing at the coast, a record 6.5 feet plus of storm surge. So the water starts moving buildings, and that's where all that panic came from. Winds were gusting some 50 to 100 miles per hour. And guys, these communities have been warned for decades about increasing flood risk.
Remnants of Typhoon Halong recently struck western Alaska, bringing hurricane-force winds and severe flooding. Toksuk Bay saw gusts up to 100 miles per hour, while Kwigillingok, Kipnuk, and Kwigillingok suffered major destruction. More than 1,500 people were displaced as rescue teams moved evacuees to Anchorage. Several towns remain without power or clean water as recovery efforts continue. Stay safe and follow for more global updates.
Tonight, after powerful storms packing 100-mile-per-hour winds swept parts of entire towns into the Bering Sea, that massive military effort in Alaska to get hundreds out of harm's way. This Boeing C-17 crammed with 300 evacuees touching down at Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson in Anchorage overnight. Families, some with small children, some in wheelchairs, pouring out. The National Guard calling it one of the biggest airlift operations in Alaska history. The storms fueled by remnants of a typhoon that tore across the Pacific, barreling into western Alaska over the weekend. That devastating storm surge flooding the towns of Kipnuk and Kwigillingok. Tribal administrator Tristan Carl watched his uncle's home being swept away.
And I saw my cousin and my nephew in there, and I never heard panicking or yelling like that ever before.
This is the damage left behind in Kipnuk, the surging sea turning already melting permafrost into muck. And the only way out? By air. Coast Guard helicopters hoisting dozens of residents out of the floodwaters. The woman who shot this video says her home is now gone. And David, this monster storm has already left one person dead, 2 people missing. And just a short time ago, I spoke with emergency management officials in Alaska who say that this is still a very dynamic situation and that right now, tonight, they are still evacuating a couple of hundred people from those outlying areas.
How many of you knew that a typhoon hit Alaska? It had Category 4 hurricane type winds and destroyed several Alaskan Native villages. People woke up to their homes floating down the river, and nobody's talking about it. Right now, a couple of sources are saying that at least 20 people are unaccounted for, but it could be way more considering not much is being pushed out there about what's happening in Alaska right now. Supposedly help is on the way, but with FEMA being defunded and the National Guard being used to invade cities, rescue efforts are very slim. People are stuck in their homes floating down rivers, going into the Bering Sea. Entire villages wiped out. Please spread the word and let people know what is happening in Alaska, because this is mostly impacting Indigenous Alaskans.
Enak ko ya.
Did y'all know that there was a Category 4 hurricane in Alaska? Well, I didn't either until I got home from my trip today and I started fumbling through Instagram. Take a listen.
How many of you knew that a typhoon hit Alaska? It had Category 4 hurricane type winds and destroyed several Alaskan Native villages. People woke up to their homes floating down the river, and nobody's talking about it. Right now, a couple of sources are saying that at least 20 people are unaccounted for, but it could be way more considering not much is being pushed out there about what's happening in Alaska right now. Supposedly help is on the way, but with FEMA being defunded and the National Guard being used to invade cities, rescue efforts are very slim. People are stuck in their homes floating down rivers, going into the Bering Sea. Entire villages wiped out. Please spread the word and let people know what is happening in Alaska, because this is mostly impacting Indigenous Alaskans.
How many of y'all knew this? If you're like me and you did not know, put me in the chat. I'm trying to see something. If you did not know that this atrocity just took place in Alaska, please put me in the chat. And I'm doing this for my own self and self-esteem reasons, because I just need to make sure that I'm just not that disconnected from what's going on in the world and that it truly is the media's fault. Guys, if this had been any other place in the continental United States, it would have been breaking news across every network. The fact that a category, whatever storm even made landfall, oftentimes Alaska is neglected. We don't really think of Alaska when we think of the United States of America, but it is a part of the United States. And it's weird because had a hurricane been gearing up to hit anywhere else in the continental United States, it would have been major CNN news. And from the looks of the chat, nobody knew this was going on in Alaska. Oh man, guys. All I can do at this point is, since this is now on my radar, I try to stay vigilant and diligent looking at if there's any like Red Cross links that get set up or something that maybe we can send a little piece of donation. But shouts out to the people over there in Alaska. And unfortunately, with this administration that we got in office, because those people is brown like this and not like this, we know that he's not going to place any priority or value on rescuing those people, and it is a doggone shame. And speaking,
Alaska was just hit by a 100 miles per hour typhoon that pushed seawater half a mile inland. Typhoon Halong started as a tropical storm in the Pacific Ocean on October 4th, and within days it exploded into a Category 4 monster, packing 120 mile per hour winds. By October 10th, it had transformed into a massive extratropical cyclone, slamming straight into western Alaska with winds topping 100 miles per hour and waves taller than houses. In towns like Kipnuk, water levels rose 6.6 feet above normal high tide. At least one person has died, 2 others are missing, and over 1,500 people have been forced from their homes, many airlifted to safety from remote villages. The National Guard, Coast Guard, and state troopers have launched dozens of rescue missions, saving at least 51 people trapped by rising water. The governor of Alaska has already declared a state of disaster, as entire communities are now surviving in makeshift shelters where one school alone is housing over 400 evacuees.
Breaking news. We have a major developing story that needs immediate attention. Homes are literally being swept away as devastating flooding has struck remote parts of Alaska. Devastating, catastrophic flooding is hammering remote parts of Alaska, and homes are literally being swept away. The people there need the world to know what's happening. The remnants of Typhoon Halong have unleashed hurricane-force winds and a massive storm surge on coastal communities in western Alaska over the past 24 hours. The situation is critical in tiny Alaskan villages like Kipnuk and Kwigillingok. Reports state that around 20 people are still unaccounted for. A spokesperson for the Alaska Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management described a terrifying scene. People's homes are floating away, some with residents still trapped inside. Hundreds of residents have been forced to take shelter in small schools, seeking safety from the rising waters as the storm continues. This is an incredibly serious situation unfolding right now. The people of Alaska need us to make sure the world is watching. Please help spread the word and follow along for more updates.
Well, Typhoon Halong sparking disastrous and deadly flooding in Alaska. This weekend, floodwaters swept through coastal communities in the western part of the state. And as of this morning, several dozen people have had to be rescued. But tragically, one person has died. 2 others remain missing.
Yeah, still shocking video, even as we look at it on this Wednesday from out of the weekend. Alaska DOT saying a combined 50 airports and roads were damaged as a result of this. Access and communication to these remote communities severed in some cases, and more than 1,000 people taking shelter across the region. As we know, crews are rolling in to help in the response and recover. We have Taylor Souson, national spokesperson of the American Red Cross, joining us now. And Taylor, I think what's so wild, I saw the number 50 for airports and roads, but was reminded that a lot of these communities are so remote, they rely on these airports for small planes to navigate back and forth. And without that accessibility, it really puts them at even greater risk in recovering from this.
Yeah, so about 90% of Alaska is actually inaccessible by road. So these communities that have been impacted are part of that 90%. There is no access to these villages except via plane and sometimes boat, depending on if, there are river access to these villages. So this has made the disaster response particularly difficult. For a number of days and during this storm, these gravel airstrips that they have that serve as an airport were underwater. And so that made access both in and out of these remote areas impossible. So right now, the American Red Cross is working with our state, our local, and our tribal governments to provide as much disaster assistance as we can. Right now, we have about half a dozen volunteers are staged in one of the hub communities of Bethel. That is the closest, less remote communities to the major villages that have been impacted. You're seeing photos of villages of Kipnuk and Kwigillingok. Those are the ones that are, we're seeing the most significant impact. And the state and the tribal governments have evacuated a number of people out of those villages to these hub villages where we're able to provide more of a wraparound support.
How has communication been, Taylor? Because given the remote nature of these villages, I mean, to know that some of these communities need help, word has to get out. Has that been affected with these floods? I only mention that because the winds associated with the remnants here, they were 80, 90 miles an hour. So any sort of towers that may have been there, I'm sure that some were damaged.
Absolutely. That was a major concern, and there was very limited connectivity, if any connectivity at all, to many of the villages, both during and immediately after the storm. There are some areas in Alaska where we have yet to hear what the storm impacts were because we have no connectivity with them. So it really is a challenge for disaster responders to begin to even evaluate the level of damage that we're seeing, across the more than 40 communities that have been impacted by this storm.
It is so wild. And in speaking to the remoteness, because it is such a big part of the story, right? And remains a part of the story because of the difficulties in getting to these people. These communities, because they're more remote, depend on themselves for hunting, for fishing, gathering their food, the supplies that they're going to need to get through the winter months. And it is starting to drop in temperature, especially in western Alaska. And we're only going to get colder as we get further into the season. So I guess, is it that race against the clock as well to make sure you're getting to those people that need it most as things start to change? And then I guess the long-term help and what that could look like.
It is a major concern for us because a lot of these communities rely on their traditional practices of subsistence lifestyle, meaning they hunt, fish, and gather all of the food and the supplies that they would need in the summer months in order to be able to survive the winter months. We saw something very similar in 2022 during Typhoon Merbok, and a number of these communities were impacted once again by the remnants of Typhoon Halong. So what we at the Red Cross have done, which has never been done before in the Red Cross, what we did during Typhoon Merbok was we actually provided some of the materials that these individuals would need in order to be able to have that subsistence lifestyle back. So if their freezers were broken where they were storing their frozen fish, we were providing freezers, we were providing vacuum sealers so that they could, very quickly gather more supplies and have the materials that they need in order to keep those safely. Fish drying racks were a number of things that we provided, which is not our typical disaster response material. Normally we're giving individuals cleanup kits, shovels, mops, rakes, things like that, but that's not what these rural communities need. And in order to support, these disasters, like tropical storms, like floods, and countless other crises, it's really important that we rely on the generosity of our donors and support through the American Red Cross Disaster Relief. So if anybody out in the public is wanting to help support this operations and operations like this, I would encourage them to visit redcross.org or call 1-800-RED-CROSS and help us with your support.
It does speak to knowing the people that you're serving and knowing what those needs are, because each disaster, while there is this understanding that a disaster brings so much tragedy, there are unique needs that we all have. So understanding what it's like in those western communities of Alaska, vital.
Yeah, and those donations go a long way, right? It's not so much about getting help out there. It's about providing the finances to support the Red Cross to be able to provide that support. Well, we appreciate you joining us here on Weather Command and continuing the story as we watch recovery efforts out of Western Alaska. Taylor Southon, National Spokesperson of the American Red Cross. Appreciate it.
I found it absolutely insane that there really isn't any coverage on what's going on in Alaska right now. Now, for those of y'all that do not know, on October the 12th, the remnants of Typhoon Halong hit Alaska. Now, they're telling me that the winds was that of a Category 4, over 100 miles per hour. But the winds ain't even just what did it, friends. What happened to this community in Alaska is devastating. Just take a look at the aftermath. What is up with all this historic, once-in-a-lifetime, devastating, catastrophic flooding that's happening? I really cannot put into words how uneducated I was about hurricanes and typhoons that hit Alaska. Not only that, but why do I feel like if this was a hurricane coming up the East Coast or the West Coast or in the Gulf of Mexico, we would have been hearing about this every day, all day long, on your news, on the phone, on the radio, everywhere. But I didn't hear a doggone thing about warning Alaska or none of that. Are we forgetting that Alaska is a state? It's a part of the United States. Friends, that's not it. Look at this. Let me just put this into perspective for y'all. Before, after. Now, they tell me currently there are airlifting rescues going on right now. Helicopters are out there trying to save people. Y'all, please pray for our friends out there in Alaska. I still don't see much coverage on this. And let me remind y'all, in case y'all don't know, and you forgot, Alaska is a part of the United States. It is a state. I know it don't seem like it. Anyway, friends, I hope I ain't got y'all up in too much of a tears. I'm going to call you back later on, okay? Bye.
We have to talk about Alaska because I don't want Alaska to get out of the headlines because right now, hundreds of Alaskans were airlifted out of their villages after this catastrophic storm that came rummaging in, essentially lifting people's homes off and floating them away. And so in towns like Kipnuk, residents were told, hey, grab one backpack filled with stuff and leave everything else. You got to get out of here. They loaded onto helicopters, onto Globemasters, and flew everyone out of there to Anchorage. This, by the way, is actually being labeled as one of the biggest airlift in Alaska's disaster response history. Remember that over 1,000 people were displaced from a storm that got out of control because of climate change. Storms are getting bigger and they're traveling further north. Remember that one person lost their lives, 2 people are still missing, as people are fearing that they got trapped inside their homes, which floated up and then went out into the water. Reason for these airlifts, by the way, is because the shelters there are already full. So now they're moving everyone to different areas because remember, it's over 1,000 people. So a couple hundred people had to move to other areas. And now there are hundreds of people without homes, and they're going to try to do everything they can to rebuild before the first frost, which is going to be happening very soon. There's a lot of organizations out there who are putting together things to raise money for. If you're going to donate to one of them, make sure it is one that is legitimate. The name of the fund, by the way, if you do plan to donate, is Western Alaska Disaster Relief 2025 Fund. And their website is alaskacf.org. I'll be sure to keep you guys updated on this, so please do share my videos and follow me for more.
Today is October 15th. It is 7:04 Alaska time. As of this morning, the state of Alaska has declared that the villages of Kipnuk, Kwigillingok, and Kwigillingok are no longer livable, so all residents are being mandatory evacuated by airplane thanks to the Coast Guard and National Guard. Unfortunately, there is a statewide housing crisis, so the survivors will be split up between many of the hub cities and even brought to Anchorage if possible by as soon as tomorrow or the next day. The whole village sites have been deemed unlivable for the foreseeable future, and luckily they do have enough clothes right now and food for now until everyone is relocated safely. The best way to donate is actually to the fund in my bio. It's the link that they're using to divvy out all the funds for all the regional hubs and all the people who are doing evacuations, as well as I could give you some information for an emergency charter plane to rescue all the animals left behind. But yeah, that's the hard update for today.
Y'all, this is an example of what it's going to be like. You know, Donald Trump, and it looks like the Republicans and Democrats, they're determined to keep this government shut down And look, I mean, these major storms are happening. Look, we just had our nor'easter about a week ago. And I still didn't show y'all what happened in New Jersey. New Jersey got badly flooded from the nor'easter, especially if you were in a coastal city. And see, these major storms are happening during the government shutdown. And remember, Donald Trump fired a lot of people in the beginning of the year that would have given the warnings. He didn't care. And a lot of the local news stations are saying now they have to independently go out and do the best they can so they can do their daily forecasts because they were relying on the NOAA to provide them with, what kind of weather was coming, and they got it all from them. And he fired a whole bunch of people, and he's in the process of firing another 10,000 people. Now, the last time I looked, it was quite a few people from the CDC that lost their jobs, like, over the last few days. So, he doesn't care. Donald Trump don't care. That's why this ain't being spoken about. These people are not white enough. So no, they're not talking about them. Yeah, these look like those same Siberians, don't yeah, I believe they are. So anyway, y'all, you know what's going on because they're sure not going to tell anybody. And these folks, they're probably not going to get that much help, unfortunately. Them getting airlifted out of there, they may help them a little more, but they're gonna leave them just like they left the folks in Asheville. Remember Kamala and Joe Biden went in there and all they offered those people were what, $700 per person? And Donald Trump criticized Joe Biden for not doing enough. And then Donald Trump went in there and he took FEMA away from Asheville, North Carolina, and then he left without even doing anything for them. So, 750, well, that's really not too much better, especially if you go through a disaster. What is that going to do? So, y'all, I just wanted to give you this update because I recently found this out myself. I had no idea. Wow. 750 per household. Okay. So anyway, that's not money that you can survive on, especially if you've lost your home and everything, your vehicle. What are you going to do with that? This just goes to show you, everybody, I know for us, we've been fending for ourselves for centuries. Now these other people are going to have to deal with it, and they're not going to deal with it very well. That's for sure. So, y'all, thank you so much for coming back for this one. I was not expecting to come back, but I am getting everything set up for our Bible study for tomorrow. So, y'all just be on the lookout for my upcoming live streams. Shabbat Shalom.